long as we got rainbows, can't go wrong.
Good luck.
They pulled up more than just crabs. What they found might change everything. Out in the icy grip of the Bering Sea, the Deadliest Catch fishermen reeled in a mystery no one saw coming. In their latest haul, amidst the familiar tangle of crabs and seaweed, the crew found something strange. It was shiny, metallic, and marked with eerie symbols that seemed to glow even in daylight. This wasn't just debris, it was something otherworldly, something that didn't belong in the ocean or on Earth. Let us dive deeper into this enigma, a story that will leave you questioning what else might be hiding beneath the waves. A haul to remember. Out in the freezing waters where waves crash like giant walls and the cold bites harder than a winter storm, the crew of the famous fishing show just pulled up something that'll make your jaw drop. These guys aren't your average fishermen. They're rough, tough, and know the sea better than their own backyards. But even they weren't ready for what came next. As the net rose from the water, something moved inside, a shape so strange it made the crew freeze. The crew was doing their usual thing, hauling up crab pots and cracking jokes about their plans once they got home. They'd been out for weeks, pulling in haul after haul of king crabs, big ones, the kind that makes all the hard work worth it. It looked like it was going to be a great day until something in the water caught their eye. They'd just pulled in one pot, loaded with crabs, by the way, when they spotted this strange glow coming from beneath the waves. At first, they thought it might be some kind of reflection, maybe from the sun or the boat. But as they hauled the next pot, they realized it wasn't light bouncing off the water. This glow was moving. The crew leaned over the side of the boat, eyes glued to the spot where the light shimmered. One of them muttered something about bioluminescent fish, but that didn't seem right. The light was too steady, too bright. It was almost metallic. When the pot finally broke the surface, the men froze. Among the usual tangle of crabs and seaweed was something that didn't belong, something shiny, something otherworldly. They worked fast, pulling the pot onto the deck, their rough hands slipping on the wet lines. And there it was, a strange metallic object twisted into the fishing gear like it had been waiting for them. The object was about the size of a car tire, but it was dense, heavy, and covered in markings. Not scratches, not dents, actual markings that looked like symbols, the kind you'd see in a treasure map or an old pirate's journal. The crew was silent, just staring at it as if expecting it to move or make a sound. Finally, they managed to get it loose and lay it flat on the deck. It was covered in barnacles and seaweed, like it had been down there for a long, long time. But underneath the muck, the surface was smooth and polished, almost like it had been made yesterday. The weirdest part? The symbols seemed to glow faintly even in the daylight. The mood on the boat shifted. These guys are used to pulling up surprises, lost nets, old anchors, even the occasional whale skull. But this was different. The crew was a mix of excitement and unease. What had they just pulled out of the deep? Captain Jonathan, the man who's been running this boat for longer than most people have been alive, gave the order to secure the object. They had a storm coming, and the last thing they needed was this thing rolling around the deck. But even as they stowed it away, the crew couldn't stop talking about it. What was it? Where did it come from? And most importantly, should they have left it down there? The storm hit hard, but the crew kept working, hauling up pot after pot of crabs. The catches were good, but the weird object in the hold kept pulling their thoughts away from the task at hand. It was like it had a presence, something you could feel even if you weren't looking at it. By the time the storm passed, the crew was exhausted, not just from the work, but from the weight of what they'd found. When they finally docked back at Dutch Harbor, word spread fast. Fishermen loved to talk, and it didn't take long for everyone to hear about the strange find. People came to see it, locals, other fishermen, even a few reporters. The crew kept it hidden, but the questions kept coming. Was it part of an old shipwreck? Some kind of underwater experiment? Or was it something else? Experts were called in, but they didn't have any answers either. The markings didn't match any known language, and the material wasn't like anything they'd seen before. Some said it might be a piece of a satellite, but that didn't explain the symbols. Others whispered about aliens, but the crew laughed that off. Well, mostly. Days turned into weeks, and the object stayed locked away, safe but ever present in their minds. The crew went back to fishing, but things weren't the same. Every time they hauled up a pot, they half expected to find something else out of a science fiction movie. And at night, when the boat was quiet, the men found themselves drawn to the object, staring at it like it might suddenly reveal its secrets. Then one night, it did. The object began to glow, not faintly like before, but brightly. It lit up the entire hold, casting strange shadows on the walls. The symbols pulsed almost like they were alive. The crew, half asleep and groggy, stumbled down to see what was happening. They stood there, mouths open, as the object seemed to change. It was like it was trying to communicate, but with what? Or who? And just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The light faded and the object went still. But now, the crew knew they couldn't keep it to themselves any longer. This wasn't just some piece of junk they'd pulled out of the ocean. It was something important, something bigger than them. They called in the authorities, who arrived with more questions than answers. Scientists, engineers, even people who looked like they might be from the government. The object was taken away, loaded onto a truck, and driven off to who knows where. The crew watched it go, a mix of relief and regret in their hearts. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could after something like that. The crew kept fishing, pulling in crab pots and cracking jokes, but the memory of the object stayed with them. Late at night, under the stars, they'd wonder what it was, where it came from, and what would happen to it now. They knew they'd probably never get the answers they wanted. But one thing was certain: the sea still held secrets, and they'd just uncovered one of its biggest ones yet. But even with the object gone, its mystery stayed with them. The ocean has always been full of surprises, but this was on a different level. The fishermen found themselves wondering what else was hidden in the deep. The ocean is vast, more unexplored than the surface of the moon. For all they knew, they had just scratched the surface. Captain Jonathan spent long nights thinking about the object. He would sit on the deck, the salty air whipping around him, and replay the moment they pulled it from the water. It wasn't just the symbols or the glowing, it was the feeling it gave him. Like they had touched something they weren't meant to, something that belonged to a world beyond their understanding. Meanwhile, back in Dutch Harbor, the object's story took on a life of its own. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said it was part of a sunken ship from centuries ago, carrying treasure and secrets from a forgotten time. Others were convinced it was proof of extraterrestrial life, a piece of technology left behind by beings who had visited Earth long before humans ever set sail. The authorities who had taken the object were tight-lipped. No updates, no explanations, nothing. It was like the thing had disappeared off the face of the Earth, and that only added to the speculation. People whispered about secret labs and government cover-ups. The fishermen didn't know what to believe. They only knew what they had seen. The crew tried to focus on their work, but it wasn't easy. Every time they went out to sea, their minds wandered. The ocean felt different now, like it was hiding more than just fish and crabs. They started to notice things they hadn't before. Strange sounds, unusual patterns in the water, shadows that seemed too big to belong to any animal they knew. The seasons changed and the object became a memory, but not one that faded. It stayed with them, a story they told around campfires and in dockside bars. It became part of their identity, the thing that set them apart from every other crew. They were the ones who had found it, the ones who had held it in their hands, even if only for a little while. The ocean always has a way of showing something unexpected, even to those who know it best. An uneasy catch in the depths. As the storm clouds loomed closer, the crew knew they had to focus on the task at hand. There was still crab to catch, and their season's success depended on hitting their target. But the strange object was impossible to ignore. Every time they glanced at it, they felt a mix of fascination and dread. The sea had thrown them plenty of curveballs over the years, but this was something new. And as they worked, the thought lingered in the back of their minds. What else could be out there, hidden in the depths? The object seemed almost otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to this planet. Its smooth surface, intricate carvings, and unnatural weight made it unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It didn't resemble any known piece of equipment or debris, and that made it all the more unsettling. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored, a place where the unexpected can and often does happen. But this was beyond anything the crew could have imagined. Hours passed, but the tension didn't ease. The object remained on the deck, secured but still drawing every eye. The crew's chatter became sparse, their usual banter replaced by cautious glances and hushed conversations. Captain Jonathan, a man known for his steady demeanor, seemed unusually tense. He kept looking at the object, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Whatever this thing was, it had disrupted the rhythm of their lives at sea. The storm finally hit, and the crew's attention shifted back to survival. Waves crashed against the boat and the wind howled with a fury that made every movement a challenge. But even as they battled the elements, the strange object was never far from their thoughts. It sat there, unmoving but undeniably present, a silent reminder that the sea still had the power to surprise them in ways they couldn't predict. When the storm passed, the crew was left with the task of deciding what to do with their unusual find. Some suggested throwing it back, unwilling to deal with the unease it brought. Others argued for keeping it, convinced that it might be worth something or at least provide some answers. Captain Jonathan, ever the pragmatist, decided they'd take it back to shore. Whatever it wasn't something they could just leave behind. Back on land, the object became the subject of intense speculation. Experts were called in to examine it, but no one could determine its origin or purpose. Its markings didn't match any known language or symbols, and its material was unlike anything commonly found in the ocean. Some thought it might be a piece of experimental technology lost at sea. Others theorized it could be something far older, perhaps even ancient. The crew's discovery made headlines, drawing attention from scientists, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Everyone wanted to know where the object had come from and what it might mean. But for Captain Jonathan and his crew, it was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of their work. The sea is vast, strange, and full of surprises. And every once in a while, it offers up something that makes even the most seasoned sailors stop and wonder. The storm was still creeping closer, and tension gripped the crew. They had stashed the object out of sight, but it was impossible to forget. Every now and then, someone would glance toward the hidden compartment where it lay. They tried to stay focused on the job, pulling up crab pots one after another, but the ocean had turned restless. The waves slammed harder against the boat, and the air felt thick, almost like it carried a warning. The haul that day was incredible. Pot after pot came up loaded with crabs, their shells glowing red under the cold gray sky. It should have been a moment of celebration, but unease lingered like a shadow. Even as Captain Jonathan called the last pot aboard, signaling it was time to head back, his mind was elsewhere. They had what they needed, a golden bounty of king crabs, but the thing below deck refused to let him feel relief. He couldn't shake the sense that they'd disturbed something they shouldn't have. Back at Dutch Harbor, word spread faster than the tide. The crew had come home with more than just their catch, and curiosity grew wild. Fishermen, locals, even reporters started showing up, their questions spilling out before the crew could even dock properly. Was it a piece of history, a forgotten artifact from the depths, or something no one had ever seen before? Theories flew left and right, but no one had answers. Back on shore, news about what the crew found spread fast, but the questions it raised were just the beginning of what was coming. Locals wonder about the strange find. Captain Jonathan made sure the object stayed under wraps, tucked in the back of the shipyard far from prying eyes. He felt a strange protectiveness over it, though he couldn't explain why. Experts were brought in, but their guesses only added to the confusion. Some said it was part of a satellite that had fallen from space. Others thought it might be a fragment of an old ship lost to the unforgiving Bering Sea. Yet none of the theories fit. The object's markings weren't letters, nor were they random scratches. They were precise, deliberate, as if someone or something had carved them for a purpose. Days passed, and the crew tried to push the object from their minds, but it was impossible. Every conversation circled back to it, and wild theories turned into heated debates. Some of the locals were convinced it came from a UFO, a piece of alien technology that had crashed into the ocean. Others whispered about government experiments gone wrong. Captain Jonathan didn't know what to think. He'd seen storms that could rip a ship apart, creatures from the deep that belonged in nightmares, but this was different. It was unexplainable, and that made it unsettling. At night, Jonathan found himself wandering back to the shipyard. He'd stand in front of the covered object, staring at it like it might reveal its questions. The strange markings seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't describe. It felt like the object wanted to be understood, like it was waiting for something. But for what? That question haunted him, and it seemed the rest of the crew. The object's presence started to change things. The crew felt it too. They couldn't name it, but there was a heaviness, a sense that the object didn't belong here. Some of them began to wonder aloud if they should have just left it in the ocean. There was a growing fear that by bringing it aboard, they'd invited something into their lives they couldn't handle. One stormy night, rain pounded the rooftops and wind howled through the streets of Dutch Harbor. The crew gathered at a local bar, trying to shake the weight that had settled over them. They drank and talked, but the mood was grim. What should they do with the object? Some thought they should call in more experts, someone with real answers. Others argued it might be better to leave it alone, to bury it somewhere and forget it ever existed. Captain Jonathan sat quietly, lost in thought. He knew the ocean held things best left undiscovered, but now it was too late. They had it, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it mattered in a way he couldn't yet understand. When the bar finally emptied and the storm raged on outside, Jonathan made his way back to the shipyard alone. The object was still there, hidden under its tarp. He pulled it back and ran his hand over its smooth surface. The markings seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, almost alive. Jonathan knew they had stumbled onto something much bigger than their small fishing world. Whatever it wasn't just a random piece of debris. It had a purpose, and it wasn't finished. The following weeks were tense. The crew returned to work hauling crabs as usual, but the object never left their thoughts. It was always there, a silent weight pressing down on them. People in town kept asking questions, their curiosity turning into obsession. Jonathan grew more guarded, keeping the object's location confidential. He felt the pressure mounting, but he wasn't ready to let it go. Theories grew wilder with every passing day. Some believed the object held ancient knowledge, something left behind by a civilization we'd forgotten. Others insisted it was proof of extraterrestrial life, a piece of evidence humanity wasn't ready to face. And then there were those who said it was cursed, that it carried bad luck for anyone who touched it. The crew's unease grew. Small accidents started happening on the boat. A line snapped, narrowly missing one of the deckhands. Equipment failed without warning. Each mishap added to their fear, making it harder to dismiss the idea that the object was more than it seemed. With strange people now watching them, the crew felt their find was dragging them into something much bigger and much harder to escape. The glow that changed everything. One night, Jonathan stood alone at the shipyard, staring at the object like he had so many times before. The storm clouds overhead seemed to mirror his thoughts, heavy and unrelenting. He knew he couldn't keep it hidden forever. Something had to be done. But what? Destroy it? Hand it over to the authorities? Or keep it and risk the unknown? Against his instincts, Jonathan let the man examine their strange discovery. The man's questions were vague, his notes hurried, and he left just as strangely as he arrived, promising to follow up. Yet something about him felt off, too eager, too confidential. It was as if he already knew more than he was letting on. Soon after, things started to feel strange. Men in dark cars began to linger near the shipyard. Their presence was quiet but noticeable, as if they were keeping tabs on the crew. The uneasy feeling grew heavier with each passing day. Jonathan couldn't shake the thought that they had stumbled upon something far bigger than they could understand. He began to regret pulling the object from the ocean. But it was too late. The object was here, and it wasn't going anywhere. As much as they tried to carry on with their lives, the sense of being watched was impossible to ignore. The crew started to whisper about the cars, about the investigator, and about the strange feeling that trouble was coming. Then came the night when Jonathan was startled awake by a noise outside his window. The darkness outside revealed nothing, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. He knew the object was drawing dangerous attention. By morning, he had gathered the crew to decide their next move. Should they keep it and continue to unravel its questions, or should they hand it over to someone who might be better equipped to handle it? The crew was divided. Some wanted to get rid of it and avoid the growing risk, while others felt they had a duty to uncover its purpose. Ultimately, they decided to keep it. moving it to a hidden location away from the prying eyes of the shipyard. Yet the sense of unease only grew stronger. Days turned into weeks, and the constant tension began to wear them down. They didn't have any answers, only the weight of the object and the unrelenting fear that came with it. The nights were the hardest, filled with restless sleep and a lingering dread that someone was coming for what they had found. Then one night, everything changed. As they were gathered near the hidden object, it began to glow. The faint light pulsing from its surface grew brighter, illuminating the cryptic symbols etched into it. The glow seemed alive, as if the object were trying to communicate something. The crew watched in awe and terror, frozen by the surreal sight. The glow lasted only a few minutes before fading, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Whatever this object was, it was far more than just a piece of metal. Jonathan knew they couldn't handle this alone. They needed real help, experts who could understand what they were dealing with. It wasn't an easy decision, but he made the call to contact the authorities. He explained what they had found, sparing no detail. By the next day, a team arrived in Dutch Harbor. These were not your average officials. They were serious, efficient, and gave no indication of their true purpose. They loaded the object onto a secure truck and drove away without a word of explanation. The crew watched as it disappeared down the road, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over them. Their lives had been turned upside down by this discovery, and now, just like that, it was gone. Slowly, life returned to something resembling normal. The crew went back to the sea, to the familiar rhythm of fishing and waves. Yet the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the vast canopy of stars, they would talk about it. Where had it come from? What was it? And most importantly, what would happen to it now? They knew they would likely never get the answers they craved. But in a way, that was okay. They had been part of something extraordinary, something that few people could even imagine. The object had changed them, left a mark that no amount of time could erase, and though it was gone, its story was far from over. And this object is not the only strange thing in the sea. Oceans, stretching as far as the eye can see, have always felt a little too big, a little too deep, and way too mysterious for comfort. People across the world have tried to explain the unexplainable, crafting wild stories of monsters lurking beneath the waves. But what if some of those tales aren't just flights of fancy? Let's dive into the murky waters of sea legends, where truth and fiction tangle like fishing nets. Take the Kraken, for example. Imagine you're on a wooden ship in freezing Scandinavian waters, and suddenly something with tentacles longer than your boat's mast emerges from the deep. Sounds like a sailor's worst nightmare, right? That's how the Kraken, a beast as big as a mountain, was born. While stories had it sinking entire ships, it's likely inspired by giant squids, those deep-sea giants that can stretch over 13 meters long. Rarely seen, their ghostly appearances fueled tales that made sailors' hearts race. Then there's the Leviathan, a creature straight out of ancient texts, described as a monster so massive it could rival the oceans themselves. It's said to be part serpent, part dragon, and all terrifying. Scholars think this legend might have been sparked by something like the Nile crocodile or even a massive whale. Picture someone seeing a crocodile's jaws snap shut or a whale's tail vanish into the waves for the first time. It's easy to see why they'd think they'd met a demon of the sea. How about the Espidachelone? Imagine landing on what you think is an island, only for the ground to move and pull you underwater. This legend of a turtle or whale so huge it fooled entire crews probably came from sightings of whales or even unusual shoals that briefly broke the surface. In a time without GPS, a whale's back in the fog could absolutely look like a new landmass. A tragic mistake, but also a perfect setup for a monster myth. Then we have sirens, those enchanting creatures that made sailors crash their ships with just a song. Originally, they weren't even mermaids, but bird-women hybrids from Greek mythology. Over time, their image morphed into the more familiar half-human, half-fish beings. Manatees or dugongs, with their oddly human-like features, likely fueled these stories. Imagine months at sea, sleep-deprived, and spotting a curious sea cow. Add a splash of loneliness and imagination, and suddenly you're writing home about a dangerous beauty singing from the rocks. Now, let's swirl into Charybdis, a name that practically screams whirlpool of doom. In Homer's Odyssey, she was a monster living in a strait, swallowing everything in her path. This might actually come from natural whirlpools or strong tidal currents. Back then, no one had a science book explaining these phenomena, so why not blame a sea beast? Jormungandr, the Norse Midgard serpent, wraps around the entire world, or so the legends say. It's supposed to rise up during Ragnarok, the Norse version of the apocalypse. Real-life sightings of enormous serpentine creatures, like the oarfish that can reach 11 meters long, probably gave this myth its scaly roots. Seeing one of those drift by? Definitely unsettling. Ever heard of the Huron Croin? This Scottish sea monster is said to be the biggest creature ever, disguising itself as a small fish to trick fishermen. When they got too close, it would reveal its true terrifying form. This could stem from something as simple as observing predatory fish like anglerfish, which lure prey with glowing appendages in the dark depths of the ocean. Japan's Umibozu takes a different approach to terror. Instead of dragging you under, this ghostly sea spirit, often described as having a round, bald head, just appears out of nowhere to wreck your day. Some say it might be based on basking sharks, which can loom large in the water with their strange humanoid silhouette. In the sunny Caribbean, people tell tales of the Lusca, a part shark, part octopus hybrid that haunts underwater caves and blue holes. It's not hard to imagine how encounters with creatures like the tiger shark or even giant octopuses inspired this myth. Blue holes are mysterious enough without throwing a monster into the mix. The Bakunawa from the Philippines is a little more cosmic. This dragon serpent is said to swallow the moon, causing eclipses. While its aquatic ties are strong, the legend might have started from real sightings of large snakes swimming in the ocean. The idea of a celestial eater? That's just adding flair. Finally, let's revisit Homer for Scylla, the six-headed menace living opposite Charybdis. She'd snatch sailors off their decks with her snake-like necks. While it's easy to see her as pure fiction, some believe she might represent the dangers of coastal rock formations which could snatch ships in rough waters. These myths might seem like tall tales, but they're rooted in something very human: the need to explain the unexplainable. When you're out on the vast, empty ocean with nothing but the horizon ahead, your mind plays tricks on you. You start seeing shapes in the water, hearing songs on the wind, and imagining monsters where none exist. Or maybe, just maybe, those monsters are out there, laughing at how close we've come to the truth. Is this glowing object a strange natural phenomenon, or could it be evidence of something the government doesn't want us to know? Tell us your thoughts, and remember to like and subscribe for more.